Thank you very much for attending this BoF about rich metadata for annotation of context for citation and data citation. We start before introducing the panel of speakers with a brief introduction on about how we arrived to the issue we are exposing to the community about need for having a way for annotating the context of a citation. Do you see my slide flowing or not? I hope you see my next slide. So I'm working in an infrastructure called VAMDC, which is an acronym from Virtual Atomic and Molecular Data Center. It is a worldwide interoperable infrastructure which federates almost 30 heterogeneous databases. And DV for VAMDC stands for virtual in the sense that the infrastructure does not contain any data. It is a software wrapping to expose in a unified way heterogeneous existing databases. This consortium is politically organized around the MOU, and the VAMDC provide high-quality scientific data coming from different scientific community, like physical, chemical community, and provide a large dissemination platform, removing the bottleneck between data producers and data users. The data which are provided by VAMDC are numerical quantities related to atomic or molecular processes. All these data have been published into a scientific paper and reviewed and assessed by the community. These data are contained into a VAMDC federated database and are curated technically and scientifically by the database maintainer. The important point is we always refer to the scientific paper which describe the data by maintaining the link to the original paper. So when an author writes a paper describing the data, we put his or her data into one of the databases which compose the VAMDC infrastructure, and we always keep the reference to the original paper. Then when a user extracts the data, the output format is XAMS, which is an acronym for XML schema for atoms, molecule, and solid, which is a standard that VAMDC created together with the NIST and the International Atomic Agency. And in these XAMS files, there will always be the reference to the bibliographic sources for the data contained into the file. And finally, a scientist will use data to produce new work. And the question we have to solve in the recent year was how to refer from this scientific paper to this final paper to the extracted file and to the original paper, which was the origin of the reused data. So for addressing this issue, we started to work in 2014 with the Research Data Alliance, together with the Data Citation Working Group and the SCOLIX initiative. And the data citation recommendation is to store all the queries with their metadata into a query store. And in our specific case, the difficulty we had to cope with is that VAMDC is a distributed set with no central management, and we had to integrate this query store feature with the existing VAMDC component. We succeeded. We have implemented the data citation and SCOLIX recommendation. And now the workflow from end to end of the process allow us to propagate the bibliographic information to the end user and to the reused papers. So a user, which may be a human or a computer script, extract data from the VAMDC infrastructure. The infrastructure responds by producing a file and providing to the user a PID, which is resolvable, and the landing page is the query store entry for this query, which contains all the query metadata, so the original query, the timestamp, the version of infrastructure when it was produced, the list of references needed for answering the query, and a way for retrieving the data file as it was computed, so the query execution. And all this information together with the produced data set are registered into Zenodo, so the query plus the metadata is assigned and the data are assigned at the DOI. All the bibliographic references used for building the output populate the DOI reference metadata. And since Zenodo implements Scolix and is indexed in OpenAir, the data is directly citable by DOI, and the author's papers referenced in the dataset will get automatically credits when the dataset is cited. So this is a strong marketing argument for data producer to put data into VAMDC, because each time their data will be reused or cited, the paper will get automatically credit through DataCite. But this feature, which is really important for us, is the source of the problem we are addressing now, because I repeat, the data became directly citable by the DOI, so the authors of the paper's references in the dataset will get automatically credit. But we are now in this situation. We have a data file with a DOI, which refers to a series of papers, but the scientific authors, the curators of the database, say that all these references does not play the same role. For example, we have some papers which are there only for defining the global context. Other papers are the main papers, and the other are just there for historical references. So not all the papers deserve automatic credit attribution when the data is cited. And the scientists say that it is worth to discriminate between all the existing type of references. So we came to our goal here, the need for rich metadata to describe the different citation contexts. So I end with this first part of the introduction, and I leave the place to the speakers, which will explain how, in their experience, they may face the need for having this mechanism for rich metadata annotation, or what benefit they may expect from having a system which do this kind of annotation. So we will go through this order. Let me just share the screen. Okay. Marie-Lise, I let you introduce your part. Just tell me when you need I switch the slides. Hello? Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
Hear me? Carlo, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to talk about one of the database, which is in VAMDC, and how we got how around the problem of automatic citation, considering all the references that were attached to the data. So just a brief introduction, basic content to understand the environment. It's a collisional database. It has what we call rate coefficients, which are used in astrophysics for the interpretation of spectra. So the database has both numerical data, which are used by the user, by the astrophysical researcher, and bibliography attached to those data. Next. Carlo, next. So, of course, a human going on the database will go to the citation policy here and see that we ask the people to cite the original authors who produced the collisional datasets and to cite the database. Next. So just for the context, it looks a little bit I mean, it's a bit complex, but the data come from data producers, and those data producers, they produce the data in 2 steps. They did first what we call quantum calculation. So this is one community in quantum chemistry, and they do what we call scattering calculation. That's another community. And they obtain what the user, the astrophysical user, is going to use in his data, which are the rate coefficients which we provide in the database. But as well, those users, and to do those calculations, they use as well other kind of data, which are spectra, and those spectra can be found in spectroscopic database. And everything here can be obtained through one or several papers. Next. And so this is reflected in what we call the collisional dataset that the user is going to use. The user is going to use here the rate coefficients which are attached here, and they might use as well the energy levels, the spectra. And we see that there are all type of references which are attached here that a human can see and can have a good interpretation about. He has a main reference here in red. You see that for the methodology, it has some references. For the step 1 of the calculation, it has references. Next, Carlo. And for here, for the spectra, it has other kind of references. And so the user going to the database can make the choice he wants. But the user going through VAMDC, next. Sorry, here is just to show that in fact, to all type, as you saw on the previous slides, all type of references had the ref type associated with it, which was 1 to 4, which was for automatic citation. Next. And so what I was saying is that the person going through VAMDC, through tools, portals, this is a kind of tool here we use, is going to retrieve all those data automatically. The data sets are going to arrive, and a set of references, and initially all the references were attached to this data set, all the ones you saw previously, which do not have the same meaning for the users. And then, through the system that Carlo described, it is when you cite the data set, one of these data sets here, you are going to have all those references attached to it initially. Carlo, next. And so you see here all these references here: main paper, potential energy paper, energy level paper, methodology, history paper, and we attach to them different kind of levels. And the point is that the astrophysical user, he doesn't want to cite all that, and it is not fair to cite all that automatically. So the main choice of the astrophysical user would be to cite only the database, the paper, the main paper, and the database. And the base call policy is rather to say, okay, you cite the main paper, but there's been a lot of work going on into the step 1 of the calculation, so you should cite as well the second paper plus the database. So what we are doing as a basic step right now is just to make the database makes a choice. So for automatic citation, we have assigned here different level of citation, and for now we use them to select the ones that will be automatically transferred for the given usage through the VAMDC hub. So basically, we do, as provider, through the automatic citation system, we do not expect the user to have any knowledge of the citation level, and you shouldn't expect user to have any knowledge because they don't care about it. And the database provider, which is us here, is equivalent to a journal editor where, in fact, the references are monitored by the referees who read the papers. And here, we are monitoring what's going to be automatically cited and referenced in the future. It is us who do that. And we make the selection to select type 1 and type 2, and that's all what goes through at present, because it is not fair that when a given data set is cited from 2015, some historical paper from, I don't know, from the 90s be cited. So this is a choice, and this is how we solve this issue at present. Thanks for your attention. That's finished.
Thank you very much, Louise. Nicolas, please, if you want to start your presentation.
Yes, may I share my screen?
Yes, yes, of course.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Nicolas Larousse. I'm working in France, but here I represent more the community. Okay. Can you see my screen? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I'm going... Is it better like that?
Yeah, we don't see your screen though, Nicholas.
Yes, I can share my screen. I don't know why. I tried, but
Hopefully it'll come in a minute.
okay. So I'm not going to share my presentation. I can send it to you afterwards.
Carlos said if you send it to him, he can show it. So if you
Okay.
want to email.
So I'm here to represent the SHOCK project. So I'm not in the same community as Carlo and Liz. It's it's in SSH communities. It's not very common right now to share data and to cite data. It's just a beginning for us, huh? And so we have the opportunity of this SHOCK project, which include main ERICs, European infrastructure in SSH. So we have the 5 great and big infrastructure in SSH. And in one task of the project, we are there we are there to find a way to make data citation actionable. And so this is a challenge in a way. Okay, thank you, Carlo. This is a challenge in a way because citations are quite diverse. The citation practices are quite diverse in SSH communities. In social science, it's more common. In humanities, we may say that it's not that common. Even sometimes it doesn't really exist to cite data. It was not data was not the noble part, may I say, of the publication. But things are changing. Thanks to the need for data management plan and this kind of thing, and now funders are asking for. So the idea is to take existing citation. For instance, you can see on my slide a citation string, which is normally human actionable. That means that you can read the string and you can find the citation back. And we want to enrich this citation in 2 ways. We have we want to use other sources of information like metadata, of course, associated to data in a repository, for instance, or associated to DOI, for instance. And also we want to enrich it with a semantic annotation tool. That means that we want people to be, we want to make people able to put some, to correct metadata if they are not correct, and to enhance and to enrich and to add additional metadata. And we want to get to something that we call a fair SSH citation. Everything is fair right now in nowadays, but this is the idea, to have something more structured. And next slide, please, Carlo. And so with this structured and enriched citation, we want to make it actionable. So you can see that there will be an API. So that means that we can share easily this kind of information. We can retrieve this kind of citation and retrieve the data as well. And also there will be a fair citation viewer for human people, of course. Next slide, please. And so if you put the two things together, so we have somewhere when we can ingest citation, and after that we enrich, we normalize, we standardize it, we put that in a standardized way, and we put that in a sort of repository of citation, and that may, when we put that all together, we have something like we call a fair SSH citation repository. And the idea is to have more than one. And next slide, please, Carlo. And the idea is to have what we call fair SSH citation infrastructures. That means that we have this kind of repositories. They all use the same API. They all use the same way to provide a citation, and enrich citation. That means that it's not only metadata associated to DOI, but something more convenient for, more adapted for SSH communities. And that's it. So this is the reason why we are there. And I can see that compared to the communities that from art science, like Carlo and Alice came from, it's SSH. We are more or less at the beginning of data citation, and we don't have any data papers, or not a lot right now. And a data journal, there is, I think, I can think about one or two. So, and that's it for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicolas. Next speaker is Fenggong Liu. Is she there? I did not see her on the attendees list for this plenary. So maybe, Fenggong, are you there? Okay. So I think we can continue with Paolo. Please, if you can share your screen.
I'm on the way to it. Is it working?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, cool. So, first of all, context. The context I'm working with is slightly different. I am working for OpenAIRE, which is the open science infrastructure for Europe. And we are offering several digital services. Among these, one of the core services we are providing is a knowledge graph, which we call the OpenAIRE research. And if I can proceed, okay. And basically what we're doing is to build a metadata collection, metadata related with different entities, which are linked with each other. So what you see here is a very high level, let's say, view from the moon of the underlying data model. But we're building a very large collection that includes all sources that are known to scientists and, let's say, trusted, used daily by scientists. So you will find here institutional repositories, data repositories, as well as the largest collections like DataCite, Crossref, Paywall, Microsoft Academics, ORCID itself. So we are aggregating and including and deduplicating and building this graph. And of course, this graph is what we use to provide several consumers of the graph with information that is relevant for different causes, right? So in a way, we want to track science. So we want to be able to rebuild the map of science, the resources that scientists are sharing. So services, products like publications, data, and software. We want to relate them with the funders or the projects that they have behind. And we can do this by collecting metadata, but also applying a lot of tricky AI text mining techniques on the PDFs that we're able to collect, on the data that we're able to collect. So we enrich this graph. We further enrich this graph. For that, we have a lot of collaborations with several labs and scientists worldwide. So the graph is fully open, and we are inviting people to help us curating this. On the other hand, we build and offer services to monitor science. So on top of this graph, you can, of course, track science. So and monitor it. So the impact, for example. So how funders have invested their money and their budget, and what is the result and the outcome of this. So you can track, for example, fairness or open scienceness by verifying how much into discipline scientists are sharing and linking to the data sets. We include, in fact, the largest collection of data and articles available out there, which is called Explorer. So, and through this, you can perform this kind of analysis. So name one. Once you have this graph, you can build services on top. And monitoring is key. Impact is key. Discovery as well plays an important role. Here, other things can be done. So thinking of science is something you can search for based on different concepts than traditionally we were used to with articles, right? Where you were looking for objects that you could search based on simple text. Here, when you're looking for data or software, you have to think beyond. It's not about finding things that match your strings, but it's also about finding things that meet your expectations of reuse. For example, you want to find data sets that have been reused in at least 3 different disciplines, right? And that have been, let's say, endorsed and been processed by a number of services, or etc. So these kind of searches are harder today to be thought for. And of course, in both monitoring and discovery, the citation aspect, so the interlinking of these objects, plays a crucial role. And the granularity also, so what we are thinking of as a link and as an object in this graph. This is not obvious. So if you're looking at it from the traditional perspective, we have objects that are linked to each other thanks to a semantic expression, which basically tells us what it can, and of course is often misinterpreted by those who are providing this information in the first place, the scientists themselves, forgotten in several cases, because scientists do not care in some cases to curate their data to the right level, so they confuse, supplemented with a citation, or they prefer to use a generic reference, or sometimes they switch them, so it's not clear. So machinery here plays an important role. And when we think about in-context citations, there are so many things that we can think of, right? So here I'm just mentioning a few, which I met in my, let's say, scientific life, and that are all very relevant for both monitoring and discovery. So of course, we need to interpret citation graphs and to report and measure qualitative aspects, knowing the specific semantic or the specific reason of a citation is extremely important. So the first obvious thing is negative versus positive citation. So the emotional aspects, so let's say, of a citation is key, and there's a lot of work in this context, which is not always obvious. And when we extend this to graphs that are as large as the one that I mentioned, this becomes let's say, challenging, not just in terms of identification, but also in terms of scalability. Another important, I think, aspect is identifying key citations. So it's not just the fact that a citation is positive, but also identifying the fact that this citation is key for this paper. So among the many that you have, this one plays a very important role. For example, what I'm mentioning is that your research outcome spins around another one, right? So you mentioned many, but this one is the origin of your ideas. That's a very important thing to do, especially today with the wave of publications we are suffering from, right? As a consequence of this, it would be interesting to analyze the problem of identifying stepping stones. So let's say the origin of multiple key citations. So some pieces of research and outcome which play a key role for the development of a science or a trend, or for the development of a number of results in a specific context. For example, a very precious data set, something like that, compared to the rest, or a version of that data set. And finally, also the discipline context is another important thing which you may see, which we may look at from different perspectives. For example, identifying when a citation comes from a methodology section or from the conclusions, or that makes already some difference. But even more, if you think of specific disciplines, for example, being able to say that you're mentioning this because it implies something with a formula that you are expressing, or it implies something because you're introducing some concept. It's very critical. And I've seen work in this context as well. So this takes me to the last slide. So I think there's a lot of work here, right? So we need to focus on something that we specifically want to achieve. For example, there's a lot of work on ontologies to describe the in-context citation, RDF ontologies, there's para-ontologies out there. There's a whole world about this. And there are tools already and directions being taken in AI, especially, and in full text extraction. For example, emotions are another important detection problem. Some concrete work was done by my colleagues in Open Citation, so that's why I'm mentioning them, because I'm more confident with the kind of work they're doing. And so they should probably be part of this discussion, I think. So that's it. So if you have any questions, maybe afterwards.
Thank you, Paolo. I think we will end with the presentation, then we can start the discussion by answering questions. So the last speaker is Dieter.
Hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, then still sharing the screen, and then we can get started. Application window, and there. Okay, so I'm glad that I can give you an introduction today on the importance of citation context and being able to annotate that from the context of Clarin. I hope you can actually see my screen, because I'm sharing a window and it says here publishing your desktop. Okay, good, very good. Then you can see more than I can see myself. From the context of Clarin, I'll try to be short and focused in this presentation on a few, I hope, simple cases, just to get a bit of an idea. There are probably more context where this makes sense, but yeah, for the cause of brevity, I'll just try to focus on a few cases. Good. Very quick introduction. What is Clarin? Stands for Common Language Resources and Technology Infrastructure. We're in ERIC since 2012, European Research Infrastructure Consortium. And we're there for scholars from the humanities and social sciences. And the idea is that we, through a distributed network of centers, give access to digital language data. Can be written, spoken, video, other cases of modalities, and digital language tools. So basically to do, for instance, speech recognition, grammatical analysis, look up in dictionaries or lexica, things like that. And the idea is to provide this through simple, single sign-on based environments where researchers can get access to the data and the tools also from other locations. We have a whole network behind this based on so-called centers. In our consortium, there's 20 members and 4 observers, mainly in the EU, as you can see on the map. And then we also have some recent additions, being South Africa and Carnegie Mellon University in the US. So we're broadening the scope a bit, but still mainly focused in Europe. Something on our data architecture. Basically, a Clarence Center is hosting, or many of the Clarence Centers, I should say, are hosting a repository with language data and or tools in it. Those data sets and tools are described with metadata. Can be categorized in several categories. You could have category historic texts or modern age speech corpora, for instance. Good. Bit of technology behind that. We have a whole metadata mechanism describing the language data and tools. I won't go into the details today. The overall, say, workflow that we often see works like this. There is harvested metadata. We have a search index for that, virtual language observatory, which allows to search through the data selections, and then from the data selection you can do data analysis. One example case of this is the so-called language resource switchboard, and this is the part that brings us to the citation context. The switchboard is an application that allows you to say, search a suitable match for a specific data set in terms of language processing tools. So you feed it with, I don't know, a Polish novel from the 19th century, and the switchboard will recognize the fact that it's Polish, that it's a PDF, for instance, and will then offer you a series of tools that allow you to do, say, a grammatical analysis on that data set. It requires a few parameters for that: the language, the format, and the specific task, namely that you want to do grammatic analysis in this case. Yes, and this is actually where in a few minutes I will come back to in terms of the annotation needs. Something on bit technical but not irrelevant. How are people citing data sets these days in Clarence Centers? Well, through persistent identifiers. That's one of the agreements, obviously for fair reasons. Most of our centers use handles, some use DOIs, and some even use both. And organizationally speaking, we're a member of EPIC and DataCite. But good, that's a bit for the initiating context. Now up to the cases for annotation of citation contexts. What I think would be extremely valuable from our perspective would be to know when a citation is made of a data set that we're talking about a data citation. These days, especially also with the conventions that you often see, it's not always very straightforward to identify whether a citation, in an easy way at least, as say a machine, for instance, whether a citation goes to a data repository where, say, a specific corpus is stored, or whether someone is referring to a paper, since we are using the same mechanisms of citation snippets, the same persistent identifiers, and for our machinery, and actually also for bibliometric research, it would be very convenient to be able to make a distinction between, say, a persistent identifier that is pointing towards a data set versus a persistent identifier that is pointing towards some paper on the creation of that data set, for instance. there's a whole technical story behind that also, in that would be very convenient for our, say, processing machinery to automatically be able to derive the fact that something is pointing to a data set that is, for instance, stored in a Clarin repository or somewhere else. It could also be in another repository. When we have such information, that would be extremely valuable for a piece of technology that we're currently looking into. You can see here a mock-up of that piece. Current work title is the Digital Object Gateway DOG. And the idea is actually that by inputting some persistent identifier to it, the system would be able to recognize, based on some probes, to what the persistent identifier is actually pointing to. As you can see here, there's an example that is pointing to the EU.B2Share repository, which actually is powered by the Invenio repository. So the idea is that this piece of software would actually recognize the fact that this is such an object stored in such a repository, and then by being able to use repository-specific API calls, would be able to mine some additional information out of this. So it could, for instance, be some basic metadata fields, but it could also be direct links to the files that have been stored in that repository record. Now, it would be, and this setup is currently using lots of heuristics. The fact that you could, for instance, see in the pattern by URL or a persistent identifier that something is pointing to a B2Share repository, or to Europeana, or to Zenodo, or to a Clarin repository. We're using a lot of heuristics for this, and actually it would be much nicer if we would have some possibility, by checking a kind of flag that is attached to the citation, to the persistent identifier probably, that says, okay, this is a data citation, and it is a data citation to either the B2Share repository, or even in addition to that, and this is a repository of the kind Invenio. So in such a way that later on, as processor, you could know, okay, I can now fire these repository-specific API calls to get more information about actually what is behind this. This can also be extended to, say, the ecosystem of Clarin repositories, because we have all kind of community-specific agreements on how to get this additional information. But I think the most important fact for us would be to recognize that the PID is pointing to a repository, and then additionally also to data repository, knowing what kind of repository and how to continue the interaction with that. With that, I hope I've been able to give some quick insight in a nice use case from our perspective. Thank you very much for your attention, and of course, if you have questions, I'm available.
Thank you, Dieter. I will conclude this quite long introduction, try to answering part of the question which are in the chat. Sorry, in the Q&A tab. This issue of defining the context of citation is common to both data citation and classic paper citation. Indeed, if we consider a bibliography, it contains no information about the citation context, and this can only be deduced from text, which only a human reader may understand. Again, the idea is to have a mechanism for automatic define the context in an actionable, machine actionable way. Understanding the intention between a citation is crucial for scientific reason. There are the bibliographic aspects, which credits may be better assigned, but we are not really interested here in defining a new H-factor lie indicator. From my point of view, the reason may reside in this second point, which is a first assessment about the quality of what is cited, because a data set which is cited as a crucial in several other works has a better quality compared to data set which has several citations from erratum works. Quite a brilliant example is this paper about the memory of the water, which has a very high touch factor, but a lot of citations are of course negative. And also understanding how and why their work is reused will help the data producer to better fit the community needs. So this partially answered the question from Graham, what about future cases where there may be a reanalysis and data become important? Actually, it's always what we are describing here is always relative to the citer. If you are writing a paper, it's up to you to decide what is important or not. And if you publish your paper today, in 3 years, things may have been changed, but you are working today, so you are referring in the context of your work. So if something will be considered important in the future, it will be cited in future as important, even if today it was considered without any attention. And some example of what we would like to do, we have some producer of data. For example, we have a time series where a data set is produced each day. We would like to have a mechanism to say that this is a new version of something which is the yesterday version. And it uses a methodology described in some paper, which dispute another paper. And for example, is formatted using a given standard. We have some example of existing feature in the literature. We have this web semantic science service of World Wide Web. Sorry, I see I missed the slide. I may describe you. I saw a lot of work, existing work in defining these categories for data citation. There are a lot of work previous to 2000 which are related to bibliometrics. And there are a new category of work which is starting with the machine learning wave, where there are described tools for trying to create automatic organization of citations starting from natural language processes of paper. And so the first step of this work is to define categories. So we can use the first part of this machine learning work, not the machine learning part, but the category part, for try to be inspired for defining categories and contexts for citation. So there are a lot of existing work, but no work succeeded in creating the momentum which converged to a standard used by a huge community. I cite here the example of this paper where web semantic service and agent on the World Wide Web. There is this ontology, which is CITO, which introduces several categories, rhetorical and factual. So we see there are cite as related, credit support, and something which is a cite as authority, use data from, use method in. So, for example, this kind of ontology may be useful for I see a question where say, so if we cite data and papers, we have two citations for the same object. This kind of structure may partially answer this question asked by Gilles, which we can put a cross-link. A paper can say use data from, and the data may say these data are described in to the paper. So this kind of context is really helpful for telling people we are not doing several times the same citation, but all these citations are the same aspect of the same scientific work. There is also this set of categories which come from this publication towards an automated citation classifier, which dates from 2000, which introduced some categories which are very similar to the first example. We have negational type category, affirmational, assumptive, tentative. So we see, for example, citing verb totally confirm, or negative one, citing work totally disputes some aspect of the cited work. And we have also methodology, interpretational, affirmational, assumptive, tentative. And for concluding and introducing the open discussion, is it worth working on a citation context within the FDA? Should we create a working group rather than an interest group who eventually is willing to participate? Another issue is what is the good granularity level, because we may have a fine-grained granularity level, which is maybe quite hard to use, and we may have a cross-grained granularity, which is something that may be embedded into a LaTeX tag. For example, cite, we are all familiar with cite, the source. We may imagine something which cite context tag the source, and this particular red tag will define the context. So this should be something quite simple in order to be adopted by all the scientific authors. Who is going to annotate the citation, which is really linked with the granularity aspect? Will it be the librarians or the author? What technology to adopt? Semantics, data model, digital object binding. And finally, how to integrate the future solution into existing infrastructure, for example, registries and services, OpenAir, for example, or in digital object infrastructure. So I don't know if someone would like to share his reflection, questions. If there are questions which has not been answered.
It's Paulo here. So the question really would be, I think it's it would be worth reasoning together on this, but I still don't fully understand what would be the outcome. I would go probably for something concrete like a working group, right? So have a roadmap that takes us somewhere to deliver something specific, right? And so understanding what is this specific thing, considering that there is a lot of work ongoing today, I'd like to ask you what you think the outcome of this working group should be in the end. One concrete result.
Is a question for me or for the audience? What?
The audience.
Okay, but for me, it's really having a mechanism which I don't know how complex and how complete, for having a way for saying that I'm citing something because it's important, I'm citing something because I do not agree with him. And if you, as I said, if you take a look to the bibliography of a paper without reading the paper, you don't know what is cited because it's important, because it's negative, because it's useless, less useful than others. So for me, it's really the idea of being able to give this basic information on how are you citing something. And since we are storing into registries all these bibliographic information, I think that it could be really useful to have a minimal system for saying, for giving the context of this citation. So for me, the outcome would be I would say a standard, a set of rules, tag, something like that, we agree on for defining why we are citing something.
Okay, so the data models and the formats to describe that.
Yes. So
Okay.
this is why the question. So we see there are a lot of things in the nature, really interesting with fine-grained granularity, cross-grained granularity. So if we choose something, I think we should be inspired by the existing, also I saw the existing is really focused either on data, either on paper. I think we should adopt a global vision, because I think that these are the same issue. If you are citing data or papers, it is really the same action. You are citing something. So why you are citing these objects? And once we agreed with the granularity, who is going to use these tools, I think that really the output would be something we agreed on, and that can be useful used by everybody. Because today it's really there are a lot of mechanisms and there is no agreement and bridges from one to another.
Carlo, if I may add, you're now talking about purposefully adding intention to data citation, right? Which is, I think, good, because the real authority of specifying that is, of course, the citer. But how about analyzing the data citations that are already out there and see if you can derive some information about the intention? For instance, there could be sometimes data is cited as a positive example, but sometimes also as a negative example.
Yes, I also think this could be a good, how to say, a training set for machine learning tools, because if we have a minimal set of well annotated example, then AI algorithm may use this as training set and try to derive the same observation on untargeted example. So I think also in a key, I think that also, even if already existing AI tools exist, we may improve them quality by providing a well annotated set.
Perhaps I could, I would like to just comment one thing what you mentioned about that we should have the same way of dealing with publications as with data. I think that the key difference, at least from the point of view of large data sets and things which require a lot of work to collect, is that dataset publication is not controlled by anybody. That journal publications have some level of quality control always involved. And this is also true in the case of when you are citing something. It also means that somebody is also checking that you are citing it correctly, in a sense. In a case of metadata, saying that, okay, this uses data from something, can mean, and I completely agree with you, it's a big issue, because it can mean a completely different things. It can mean that it uses just slightly some data from there, something, and it's mostly own work, or it can be just reformatting the same data set completely. So I don't know how to, I completely understand that this is a really big problem, but I think that there is a really big fundamental problem as long as the data sets don't have a good quality control on themselves, who can publish something, especially when using some other people's data in collecting it together. And I think this is a bit of an ethical issue as well, but I've actually encountered this in real life, that people have been putting, especially in publishing papers, and they have to publish the data set. They can publish a data set which they have done very minimal changes from the original data set, but it's slightly different, so they publish it as their own data set as addition to the paper published. So I don't know if this makes any sense to anybody.
Sorry, just for answering you, Ari, I think that from the point of view I would like to give to this work, it's really depend on the citer perspective, because imagine you are saying you are publishing a new data set on your name because you have just changed 2 or 3 data. I think that it's really, we are agnostic about those aspects. And if you would like to cite in your work this data set as really important, you will be free to cite it as really important, and you will have the specific tag. And if your colleague consider it is plagiarism, he will be free to cite this data set as plagiarism, because he thinks it's his data set and you just hijacked this. So he will be free to use a plagiarism tag, and you will be free to use the really important tag. And we are just providing the tag and the tools, but we are not controlling how and if people use them correctly. It's really like
I completely agree. I just think that I just wanted to highlight one specific use case where it would be really important that you could have in the data citation a way of describing that what is your relationship, what is the relationship between these objects. And it's not just that it's based on something, but how much is based on something. I think that would make things at least easier to quantify. Because even in this case, it was not intentionally, they were not intentionally plagiarizing this one, but they just simply didn't have any tools to describe this relationship better.
Yes, of course, if you use plagiarism, you are responsible for what you are using. If you, as I would like to say, we are not giving a system for controlling the intention, just for expressing them. You are always responsible for what you are saying. If it is in a paper which is accepted, or if you just put a PDF on Zenodo, it's not the same level of trustworthiness, but we are not into this. We are not into this control of quality. We are just let's say author-oriented, and provide authors a way for defining why they are citing. And I think that this minimal perspective is really important, because otherwise we will go deep into all these considerations about data quality, verification, and etc. And I think if we would like to do something concrete to be able to build on, we should just concentrate on these minimal sets and try, I think if we can plug it open the existing data site schema, it will be just fine. And then people will start use it as they wish. As today you use your LaTeX compiler for writing things, but LaTeX is not responsible for what you are going to write. I see, Ray, you have your mic open. Would you like to say something? Anybody else?
Maybe Carlo, regarding coming back to what we can find in a publication, and it was also a lot of questions about that in the chat. During this project, the SHOCK project, we tried to extract data citation from DH papers from a DH conference, and there is no, as it was said before, there is no real good practices about data citation. And I saw also in the chat that people are wondering why, if authors are citing very often data, it's not the case. And we try to have a sort of inventory of different citation practices, and we saw that it's very diverse and not very, people are not citing data very often. And not only, I think that it's not only in SSH. But maybe with artificial intelligence tools, as you said, Carlo, maybe we can do things on a more large scale that we have done with some papers from one conference.
May I? On this side, we'd be pleased to support such experiments. So we as OpenAIRE, I mean, we have the infrastructure in place. We have close to 15 million PDFs. So and we're happy to help if we can try to apply algorithms or any sort of thinking on top of this data and extrapolate content. On the other hand, as a result of this working group, probably what you mentioned before, I think it would be very important to get in the beginning. So deciding pragmatically on a model, research tends to be either over descriptive. They tend to model the world, and the world pragmatically is different. So maybe we can adopt some of the standards out there, identify a number of specific concepts that we would like to model, which we can concretely model, and start thinking about this. So to start thinking on how to implement it in concrete use cases. And again, here we can help. We may engage publishers, for example, engage with the community of researchers. Then on top of that, you can build the tools we're mentioning, because you can post-infer this information as long as you have a place to store it, right? And a way to represent it. So this should be the first step, I think.
And I just want to add too, we're trying to do this from the AGU side too. And we'd be interested as well. We just had a conversation recently about how we sort of annotate these the differences between the citations, software data, and other research objects. So we'd be sort of this modeling activity.
Sorry, Christopher, I missed your presentation. Could you repeat your institution, please?
Yeah, it's AGU, American Geophysical Union.
Okay, thank you.
For the record, we are already experimenting something you may be interested in, which is finding links from articles to datasets in text and to software in text. And what we find is actually interesting. So there's a lot of, for example, disciplines that are using URLs or using, for example, links to GitHub to cite software, right? And we collect all of this. And it's not a small number, right? And it's the same for proteins or bioentities, or they're often cited in text, of course, as well as data sets. So many of these, if you're interested, we can provide you with the data and the numbers.
We had a meeting recently with a group, CiteAs Grobid. They're using this Grobid tool to mine the literature to ultimately make a better model for extracting out citations for software, and they're sort of building a corpus of this information. I think at the moment they're working with Paywall and other sources for content and trying to improve their model. But I believe it's also used for other types of citations, and I think leveraged by ResearchGate and CiteAs and CiteSeer. I think Grobid is leveraged by a lot of places. So I wonder if that's what Paolo is using too, or.
We are in touch with Paywall, but on this matter we haven't collaborated. So we offered, of course, our tools and our data. They're open, but we have mining for that. It's not rocket science. It's something that works fine. It's concrete. Plus, we tend to find out, once we find a link from an article to a software, we also find the permanent link in a software heritage. So in the graph that we're building, we have an entity, software, which brings both the GitHub or whatever is Bitbucket, whatever is the link, plus the persistent archive identifier, which is important for reproducibility. And we rebuild the link that is nowhere appearing in metadata to the publication. So when we expose the publication from OpenAIRE, you will find the link to the entry of the software. That's an interesting exercise, which could be further extended, in fact, because people, for example, cite software like zip files in local file systems, right? And this is something that you can identify. So we do, for the moment, we just discard them, but it's interesting. There's more that you can do.
So from what I'm seeing, there are several aspects. Actually, you are describing two ways of this annotation. We describe it two ways for using this annotation. One is a priori, the other is ex ante. So in one case is the author which is defining his citation intention, and on the other, the paper is already written or the citation is already done, and we are trying to reconstruct a posteriori his intentions. So there are two different exercises from the conceptual point of view, but I think we may agree that we can use the same schema, the same object for defining the intention in the two cases. One is I'm expressing my intention, the other is I'm deducing the intention of somebody else, but we can use the same object, the same categories for defining these intentions. And the other aspect I see is that you would like to extend this not only to papers and data, but also to software.
If the question was for me, yes, we are not to that point. So we infer the link, but not the context. So we know where the link is in the text. Also, when we find the DOI to a data set in the text, because this is the case. In some case, they don't put it in the bibliography, but they link it from the text inside the text. So we know where to find it, but we have never tried to, let's say, give a meaning or a semantic to the context. We had an activity in one of the previous projects that wasn't unfortunately approved, but I was trying to do a very simple exercise to understand the semantic of the citation with respect to the data side classification. So just to know, for example, if the paper was supplemented by the object that was referring or was citing the object, which makes a huge difference in terms of interpretation. Supplemented by is always positive in a way. Citation can be negative. And even understanding that little bit requires AI training sets and is discipline specific. So that's the other non-obvious thing. You cannot apply the same techniques across different ways of writing articles in general. Your analysis, Carlo. So the infrastructural part is key, and then you have the ex ante and prefs. So it's perfect.
In this paper that was mentioned earlier, the Fabio and Saito, it's funny. I had spent 10 years in astronomy, and one of the examples used was astronomy, the work that we did with the SWAN annotation tool, and trying to, sort of do this relationship linking. And it's cited as an example, and we never implemented it because it was still very, I think technically it was hard to do. And one of the things we were trying to do is open that up, annotation of astronomy literature for the wider community to make these relationships. And it just I never panned out. So I'm looking for. It would be great to see applied examples if anyone if anyone's listing those, especially like this type example that we're interested in trying to describe this relationship, the types for citations in our literature right now too, in the AGU corpus.
Yes, it's really important what you're saying, because I think it's insists on the importance of finding a good ratio between complexity and completeness and the usability. We should define something which is quite simple to use, but complete enough to have a meaning. And we have to find the good adjustment. And also, I would like to. I see we have 10 minutes left, trying to wrapping up. So I put at the end of the shared document, I recall in the chat the URL of the shared document. At the really bottom, I put going further. So who would like to? Sorry, it's live. I plan to have a paragraph for who is interested in being active in an eventual working group, and somebody is writing that they added a column for interested into a working group already. So please refer to the attendees table. And also, I would like to say I will put all the materials, so all the slide and the reference paper, into a file I will put online on the RDA site together with our presentation. So please check. I think by tomorrow it will be done. I will try to put all the support, the slides and the cited papers, and I will try to reanalyze the question and answer and the chat in order to put into the notes of the BoF Father all the references and the important point we should refer to. Okay, so do you think it's better to have a working group rather than an interest group? And also how to join with existing data citation working group? Because before proposing this, I discussed with Andreas Rauber, which is the chair of the data citation working group, seeing if he was interested in adding this topic to his working group. And the answer was he was more interested in the technique of how citing something rather than why. And we are really on the question of why I'm citing something. So I think these are, I would like to say, these are separate approaches which are complementary, but I think there is no no real overlap from a technical point of view, because we are not interested in the mechanism of citation, what we are using for the citation. We are really interested in why you are citing, how to express this into a machine actionable way. Then you can serialize this in different ways, either in a citation snippet, into a nano publication, etc. But I think even if it is disjointed, I think we should keep in contact with other people like colleagues, people in data citation, and maybe try to bridge with data side people.
Carlo, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I had audio issues earlier, but I think there is enough substance here to produce a very useful working group with some very useful outputs. But there is a bit of work that would have to be done ahead of time, not only defining the scope, but really the use cases that are meant to be addressed by the work of the working group. And so it might be useful to at least start an interest group where that groundwork could be laid out, and then out of that form a working group with a very focused set of goals.
I'm just wondering, I don't know, my name is Marta. I don't know if people can hear me. I have problems with my camera, so I can't switch on. I just know that it's a lot of work to form an interest group or a working group, like bureaucracy in terms of preparing all the documents. And actually, that the charter, which is needed to propose a working group or an interest group, actually already asks a lot of really useful questions and asks for use cases. So perhaps working together within the people who are interested on a charter for a working group could actually help to clarify those cases. I wonder, that's more of a question to people who also have experience in preparing such charters.
Marta, can I, because we have already activated an interest group, which is called Open Science Graphs. We think may be very related with this. So some of the activities include, so the objective is to enable exchange of data and links across initiatives that are building or providing access to metadata viewed as graphs, right? So exchange links between, I don't know, Crossref, which has publications related with authors and funders, and other similar initiatives, which could be the OpenAir Graph, the Freya initiative, the Microsoft Academics. So agree on standards, formats, and protocols to exchange these kind of things. As working groups, there are other options, which are tools, for example, to extract and infer information, the duplication of information, everything that is related in curating and making these graphs more, let's say, useful to the community. I think this is one of the activities that fits with this kind of work. Is what we're trying to do de facto is try to enhance these graphs with a very specific objective in mind, but I think it's a natural extension of it. So you may consider this as a possibility.
Paolo, would it be appropriate for that interest group to host an effort to formulate a working group around the specific aims that have been discussed here today?
I think it could be possible, yes. Of course, I need to discuss it with the co-chairs, but we have a session today at 2:45. So you're very welcome to participate and propose that. We will propose like 3 working groups, but only one, of course, will be able to be active in the beginning. And I think one of the 3 actually may include what you're mentioning as one of the core activities. I don't want to go now into the detail, but I think it fits nicely. Carlo, you may think about it.
Yes. It's a 2:45, yes?
Yes. And if you want, I can share with you offline the intro slides.
Okay, thank you. So I'm really not sure about the format, because I see we are several people interested in these stems and having the use cases. But again, how to shape the work between a working group, interest group, try to join something existing. From my point of view, the difference between an interest group and a working group was the finite time for working group, which is 3 years, and you have to provide an output at the end of 3 years, which may be scaring for some aspects, which is also positive from others, because you are forced to work and to produce something at the end. I'm afraid that interest group discussion may be quite long, and at the end it could be very let's say you are trying to aggregate other use case and other needs, and I'm afraid that you will never converge. So these are really my thought. I really don't know how to organize this activity starting from this bird of father.
Carlo, another possibility, and Maggie mentioned this, but I'm part of this effort. But we we organized a data citation community practice meeting not too long ago that she referenced, that brought a lot of people to the table. And I think one of the valuable aspects of that meeting was that it brought some practical examples, you know, of like what, again, like how are people trying to apply these approaches, and it really brought a lot of people to the table, even researchers and, you know, the infrastructure people, publishers, librarians. So, you know, I think that could be also a venue. Like I mentioned it in the interim, it could be a way to bring more people to the table. And I can bring this to our group as a potential next topic too. It's another opportunity.
Okay, but the group you are describing is outside or inside the Research Data Alliance?
It's outside. Sorry, but it's just another venue. You know, I think it brings. You know, I think one of the things that happens at RDA is that, you know, we don't necessarily have the researchers or other people at the table. So that's why I was mentioning it as a way to bring, you know, a lot of the, you know, some of the other voices into the conversation.
Yes, so I think it's really positive to have a lot of people think and try to solve these issues. But I think we should give, since we are in an RDA context, an RDA format to this work. And so really, the free option I see is joining an existing interest group or founding a new IG or new working group. And as I said, there is this slightly difference between interest group and working group, which is the time limit and the need for producing an output at the end of 3 years. So if we go for a working group, we should be really motivated and work fast.
Can I make a comment, Carlo?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so I'm Maggie Hellström. I come from ICOS. It's one of these European researchers. So I don't think that we have really exactly the same problem that you were describing for VMDC, for instance, but this is certainly a very interesting point. I would suggest trying to move towards having an interest group rather than a working group to start with, because then if we had a data citation related topics interest group, then we could set up various task forces there to identify issues that could then be worked on further, and then we can use those task forces to define the scope and the charters, etc., for working groups, and then propose those to the RDA. I think we are right now at the initial stage in this discussion, and I think it could be a bit of a challenge to go directly from where we are today, having seen that this is obviously very interesting, but really going directly into the case statement writing phase. So maybe one could think of holding off a little bit, also making a connection to this AGU group. There may be other groups on a global scale that are also addressing or thinking about these same problems, and then we can then move forward under the umbrella of an interest group. Because right now I fear that the RDA has become a more and more European and North American arena, even though there are, of course, really a lot of efforts being made to be more inclusive on a whole global scale. But I think we should strive towards also picking up on those other areas of the world where I'm sure these exact same scholarly communications and related issues are very important.
I forgot to mention too that this thing that the community of practice is something that's being discussed with RDA too, resulting from that meeting that we had. So we're trying to stand up this community of practice. So sorry for not mentioning that before, Carla.
Yes, I think an interest group seems, for this aspect, it seems wiser, because you can define better the scopes and the goals and try to work, to start working on this aspect of granularity and on the different actors which will use these kind of things. So I think, yes, an interest group is a good format to start with. Okay.
Carlo, let me play the advocate's devil. So I think it is true, because the interest group is the easiest thing to start with as a charter. But I think in general, that's at least my opinion, but interest group should be quite broad in terms of topics. So that's another difference between interest group and working groups. So if an interest group is very extremely specific, like the kind of topics we're discussing today, or can fit within a broader interest group, I think this should be probably the best way to go, because it's already quite of an issue in RDA to combine the different working groups, understand where they overlap and so on. So if we introduce further, let's say fine-grained granularity, we tend to duplicate the work rather than. So whatever is the interest group you would like to fit in, also the data citation, for example, could be a good fit, I think. It's better if you focus on something specific, as you said, short-term working group, deliver something within a broader area that may be relevant to you. That would be my preference, I think.
I think I have to agree, after thinking about this, I have to agree with Paolo, and I think we just have to go back to the data citation, and I I have worked there quite a lot, and I understand very well Andreas's, Raubert's comment about the technical. He's very much a technical person, but I think that within the concept of that interest group, I think we could also work from there in figuring out these what the data citation actually means, and the things what we discussed here. I think that we should perhaps rediscuss with him about this issue, because I think it would fit perfectly here, and we would then avoid spamming with a lot of extra interest groups.
One other thing, probably data citation is very specific to data, while in open science class we are dealing with all kinds of citations, in a way, on how to express them, share them, describe them, infer them. So conceptually speaking, probably it would be a good fit in there. But again, it's up to you to choose. No problem at all, of course.
Yes, sure, it's not only data. We also mentioned papers and software eventually. So I think that there is no perfect solution. All the solution has their weak points and their strong points, and we have to find a way to work into the RDA framework.
Actually, I would still. I mean, even though it says data citation, but after working there, I think that it would be interesting to discuss with them on the. I understand that there is a lot of neighboring interest groups, but that is from the work they do is relatively close from the technical point of view, and we could bring there the philosophical or let's say practice point of view more, and so that way I'm just thinking that maybe we could even discuss with them about changing the charter more towards general research object citation. I think it's their solutions in general are not usually just data oriented, even though there is some aspects of the solutions there.
Okay. Thank you very much for attending this session. And thank you very much for the speakers and all the participants for nurturing the discussion. And as I said, I will put online by tomorrow all the materials, and I will try to update the notes. And I will keep you in touch about the future of this activity. Thank you very much to all of you.